With dreams of becoming a successful writer and finding love like in a Jane Austen novel, Agathe is a hopelessly clumsy yet charming young woman working at the legendary Shakespeare & Co. bookshop in Paris. When her best friend lands her a spot at the Jane Austen Writers' Residency in England, everything changes. Will she finally get her Jane Austen moment? Critics call Jane Austen Wrecked My Life a delectable modern rom-com and brimming with charm. Watch at home on digital today. Rated R.
Welcome to The Thing About Austen, a podcast about Jane Austen's world. I'm Zan.
And I'm Diane. And this episode, we're talking about the Barouche-landau. This episode takes us to Surrey, that garden of England, where Mrs. Elton is busy making plans upon her arrival in Highbury. Thank goodness someone with class and taste finally moved to this town.
She has work to do.
She has work to do. While returning a visit at Hartfield, Mrs. Elton shares with Emma her ideas for when her sister and brother-in-law visit.
So this is from the text. My brother and sister have promised us a visit in the spring or summer at farthest, continued Mrs. Elton. And that will be our time for exploring. While they are with us, we shall explore a great deal, I dare say. They will have their Barouche-landau, of course, which holds 4 perfectly. And therefore, without saying anything of our carriage, we should be able to explore the different beauties extremely well. They would hardly come in their chaise, I think, at that season of the year. Indeed, when the time draws on, I shall decidedly recommend their bringing the Barouche-landau. It will be so very much preferable. How many times can she shove that word into a conversation?
Well, it's important for all of you to know that we did have to cut that quote down. I mean, she keeps going, you know? Like, there are more mentions of the Barouche-landau.
Yeah, she's doing the most to promote the Barouche-landau in this scene.
It's like, I don't know if you know this, but my sister and brother-in-law, they're rich, and they own this very fancy and fashionable thing that I need you to know about.
Yeah. And I don't want you to forget in the span of my conversation. Yep.
Well, before we get into exactly what a Barouche-landau is and just why it's so fancy and fashionable, we want to first thank our sponsor for this episode, Sony Pictures Home Entertainment, presenting Jane Austen Wrecked My Life.
Starring Camille Rutherford as Agathe, a hopelessly clumsy yet charming young woman who works in the legendary Shakespeare & Co. bookshop in Paris. Critics are calling Jane Austen Wrecked My Life a delectable modern rom-com and brimming with charm.
While Agathe dreams of being a successful writer and of experiencing love akin to a Jane Austen novel, she finds herself desperately single and plagued by writer's block. That feels relatable.
Definitely, very. When her best friend gets her invited to the Jane Austen Writers' Residency in England, Agathe finally has her Jane Austen moment and is caught in a very unexpected romantic triangle.
Drama! Ooh. The intrigue. Agathe must let go of her insecurities to decide what she really wants for herself and to achieve her romantic and professional dreams.
Sign me up. Watch it at home on digital today. Rated R.
So, back to the Barouche-landau, the moment you've all been waiting for.
Yes.
So here's the thing. We can't really talk about the Barouche-landau without also talking about the Barouche. And also a little bit about the Landau. So you're sort of getting all of those topics covered in this episode. So first, we will start with a definition and description of a barouche.
Yes.
And when you say barouche, you have to say it like that. Barouche.
Barouche. Give it the gravitas it deserves, please. So the word barouche comes from a dialectical German word, barouche, or it might be from the Italian birocchio, which originally meant two-wheeled cart, coming from the Latin birotus, bi meaning two, rotus meaning wheel. This is not at all confusing, of course, since the barouche is a four-wheeled carriage.
What's particularly interesting about this word is that when it appears in the English language in 1801, according to the OED, it has the spelling and pronunciation that makes it appear French, but it's not a French word. It just sounds French because it's fancy, and French things are fancy.
I love that it's just like, they're like, we've made up a French word for you. There you go, France. You're welcome. Okay, so what makes the barouche so fancy? Let's get into this. According to Sally Walrond in her Encyclopedia of Driving, the barouche was, quote, a luxurious, open, four-wheeled carriage used extensively throughout the first half of the 19th century. The canoe-shaped body was built on a perch and hung by leather braces on 4 C-springs. The rear seat had a leather hood called a calash, which could be erected to protect the passengers from rain. So that's our basic kind of working definition.
That means it was a relatively shallow carriage that had a seat in front for 2, the driver and one other, and seats in the body of the carriage facing each other for up to 4 passengers. So it could carry 6 people in total.
And the barouche was either driven from that high front box seat or ridden postilion, meaning someone was riding on one of the horses to lead the team. So this carriage was also fairly lightweight, but it was generally drawn by a team of 4 and up to 6 horses. So you're starting to get a sense of the fanciness, right, with all of these horses.
Yeah, this is not an inexpensive vehicle to operate.
Mm-hmm.
That retractable hood or calash is a defining feature of this carriage. It was relatively easy to put up and down, and it was ostensibly to protect the passengers from rain. But since it's only over the back half of the carriage, it can only protect half of the passengers. Walrond also describes a knee flap, which could also be drawn up during nasty weather to give additional cover for passengers. But as she writes, whilst this flap was in operation, the front seat was rendered useless. What she means by that is that back-facing passenger seat, not the people on the driving box. So
right, yeah.
They would still be able to sit there and be fully exposed. But then within the passenger seats, if you have that knee flap down, nobody can sit there.
Yeah. So yeah, we're reducing our passenger capacity for sure. So the barouche's open frame made them really popular for driving in the country during the summer. But they were basically unusable unless it was warm and dry, obviously, because of what we just described. It was usually not the primary carriage because of its limited usefulness. And that meant that they were markers of high social status of their owner because, you know, the barouche is a flex because it means you own multiple carriages. You're not going to just have one. The barouche is not going to be your single vehicle.
And it's also a little bit impractical. So it's like, not only do you have this extra carriage, but it's one that you can only use in specific conditions on certain days of the year.
Like half of the summer for half of the time.
The barouche is often considered a variation on the landau, which is another four-wheeled carriage with the driving seat and room for 4 to 6 passengers. It also had retractable hoods or heads. The big difference between the two is that the landau's heads were on both the front and back halves and could be pulled up to create an enclosed carriage. So this is kind of like a true convertible situation.
Absolutely. That's the definite comparison here. Yeah. And because of these two retracting halves, however, landaus were really heavy, right? It takes a lot of weight to get those frames to be able to move. And so landaus were really, really heavy in the late 1700s. So the barouche, with its one calash, was this great compromise in terms of weight. But it's not the only compromise. As Mrs. Elton likes to remind everyone, the Barouche-landau was also a mashup of these two carriages.
The Barouche-landau, as Walrond describes it, is, quote, a carriage built on the lines of a barouche with some landau characteristics. It tried to be a bit more lightweight, like the barouche, with its shallow depth, while still having the covering of the landau, just on less heavy structural lines. So trying to have the best of both worlds here.
But again, not super practical, and it was not a particularly popular vehicle. Never really caught on. But Walrond points out that, quote, the Prince Regent drove one at Brighton in the early 1800s, when it became a fashionable carriage for amateur four-in-hand driving. So if you wanted another indicator of how frivolous this vehicle was, Prinny's use of the vehicle because it was just a fad really says a lot about him and maybe the sucklings, you know?
And Mrs. Elton by association, because she really wants you to know that she is associated with that carriage.
Yes.
So we've mentioned in previous episodes that there were a lot of innovations in the late 18th century that led to the widespread popularity of carriage culture. But it might be worth identifying a brief highlight reel, if you will, of some of those specific innovations. So sit back, relax, let us take you on this journey.
Cue the montage.
It's like the kind of old-timey like film reel, it's all crackly. And
you can hear all the crackly like clacking in the background. Yep, here we go. So first, there was a lot of investment that focused on developing better infrastructure for roads and turnpikes and that sort of thing via legislation such as the Turnpike Acts and the 1762 Westminster Paving Act. This period also saw innovations on wheel construction and spring-based suspension, and all of that contributes to the rise of a vehicle like the barouche.
Ian Mortimer, in his book, Time Traveler's Guide to Regency Britain, explains that before the 1790s, wheels were constructed by nailing all of the disparate parts together. That changed with the advent of the iron-hooped tire, which was when a constructed wheel was then fitted with heated iron around its circumference. When the iron cooled and contracted, it made that wheel significantly more secure and supported.
Carriage suspension also saw a big leap forward with what we would call today a leaf spring suspension. This is when one or more narrow, arc-shaped, thin plates of metal are attached to the axle and chassis in a way that allows the spring to flex and respond to the irregularities in the road surface. So, in the Barouche and the Barouche-landau, the C-spring, which is a variation of leaf springs, was the primary suspension, and it absorbed a lot of the impact for passengers.
A little bit of a comfier ride.
Mm-hmm.
So, as Ben Jackson points out in his article, the thrill of the chaise, gendering the phaeton in 18th century literary and satirical culture circa 1760 to 1820. Getting through that title without laughing, I would like an award.
It's such a good pun.
So funny. So good.
This man deserves the standing ovation for that title.
Mm-hmm. This era can be described as the, quote, transportation revolution. And as a result, carriages were more customized for specific uses, whether in town or country, for long rides or for leisure, etc.
And Jackson goes on to explain that this revolution, quote, incentivized British manufacturers to innovate and improve existing production processes and technologies and enabled them to produce more varied quality products. And this is all in reference to kind of carriages. So all of this, in turn, meant that previous models of carriages, quote, evolved into new, adapted forms and hung on new types of springs. The shallow body and the fold-down hood of the two-person calash gave way to the four-seat vis-a-vis arrangements of landaus, landaulettes, and barouches at the end of the 18th century.
It's an exciting time.
What a revolution.
Mm-hmm. All these innovations also came with a cost. In the 1886 publication, Driving, written by the 8th Duke of Beaufort, he writes, a barouche on sea and under springs cannot be obtained from a first-class London maker under 200 guineas, and may be much more expensive according to style. The carriage must not only be well-horsed, but is necessarily accompanied by a footman, whose wages and maintenance scarcely come within the scope of the present inquiry.
So, Beaufort continues. In considering the expense of landaus and barouches, the light coach is a few guineas cheaper than a paired horse landau. It may be comprehensively said that neither can be handsomely started under 500 guineas, even if one pair be kept, and such equipage may cost as much more as their owners like to spend on them.
So it's like, here's the minimum, but you can keep going.
Yeah, because again, these can be drawn by a single pair could technically do it, but you want the 4 at the minimum, but you can go up to 6.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to inflate the costs.
Yeah, and you want your horses to be fancy too,
Obviously. They have to match. We can't have mismatched horses.
Yeah. Jackson also provides some context on the cost of maintaining a barouche. He writes, elite men lavished money on both decorative and structural repairs to their coaches. Swiss-born courtier General Major Jacob de Boudet spent £45, 2 shillings, 6 pence on repairs to his barouche between 1808 and 1810. Indeed, the cost of coach maintenance was so great that men began to buy coaches that could easily adapt to changing fashions. That's smart.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of money to be spending within a 2-year span.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you want one that can be adapted, converted, that sort of thing. Yeah. And all of these expenses were part of wanting to have the latest and greatest barouches, in part because of the popularity of driving culture, and even more specifically, driving clubs that were becoming really popular in the early 19th century.
One of the most famous was the Four Horse Club, established by Charles Buxton and his friends in 1808. This club was also called the Whip Club and the Barouche Club. Obviously, this last nickname was because the members all drove a form of barouche.
Jackson explains that the Barouche Club was, quote, seriously invested in the structural and aesthetic design of their club carriages, and issued a notice in the Sporting Magazine in February of 1809, which gave explicit instructions for a host of meticulous material specifications for the club's carriage's model, design, mechanical and structural elements, upholstery, and painting in granular detail.
Now, before we move on to talk about the barouche and Barouche-landau and Austen's works specifically, we thought we'd round out this conversation with 2 additional references to other barouche pop cultural moments of note, at least during this time. Perhaps not of note to you, the listener, in present day.
But what are we here for if not for barouche pop culture? Welcome to the show.
Uh-huh.
In 1807, the novel The Barouche Driver and His Wife, A Tale for Automne, was published by Charles Sedley Esquire in 2 volumes. The protagonist of the novel, Edward Ormsby, is a romantic Irishman turned fashionable gentleman who inherits a fortune and pursues high society. Amid the satire of aristocratic excess, he secretly marries Maria Grunter, and their barouche symbolizes the vanity that they pursue when they are seeking acceptance in this really superficial London society.
This novel was a tiny bit scandalous. Its subtitle, containing a curious biography of living characters with notes explanatory, suggests that it used thinly veiled portrayals of real people doing some slightly risque things. If you see yourself in this book, it's you.
Exactly. It's also interesting just because this author, there's debates about whether just this Charles Sedley actually existed. So this is quite possibly written under a pseudonym because he's doing some of this expose work, right? Anyways, the fact that this novel was published in 2 volumes and reprinted in multiple editions, we get a 4th edition published in 1808, all of this suggests that it enjoyed a modest degree of popularity and would have made the barouche of the title a somewhat obvious symbol of this kind of aspirational wealth and excess that's visible in London elites.
And while that was a fictional, so we think, and while that was a fictional depiction of a barouche in semi-scandalous context, there was a real drama that unfolded much like the top of a barouche in the public eye with a mysterious barouche named and described in a flurry of published pamphlets.
So, in 1808, the Irish brevet major Dennis Hogan published a pamphlet titled An Appeal to the Public and a Farewell Address to the Army, accusing the Duke of York of corruption and favoritism in the British Army. His dramatic resignation and claims stirred public debate.
In response to Hogan, an anonymous pamphlet was published titled A Short English Answer to a Long Irish Story, or A Key to the Mystery of the Barouche and Banknotes, proving Brevet Major Hogan's accusations against His Royal Highness the Duke of York to be barefaced calumnies. That's just the title. That's just the title of the pamphlet.
Yeah.
This pamphlet mocked Hogan's narrative, portraying it as exaggerated and untrustworthy, especially ridiculing a scene involving a mysterious woman in a barouche who Hogan claimed tried to bribe him not to publish his pamphlet. The exchange sparked a small pamphlet war, reflecting deep divisions in public opinion over military ethics, Irish identity, and royal accountability in Georgian England. You know we love a good pamphlet war, so...
We do. You know, I am all about a pamphlet exchange. Okay, so all of this context brings us to Austen and the ways that the barouches and a very notable Barouche-landau show up in her novels. So barouches come up a lot in Austen's work, so we won't go over all of those scenes. So we'll give our usual caveat that if we've missed your favorite reference, we are sorry. But a major theme of all of them is that the barouche says a lot about who owns it.
We'll mention the scene with Henry Crawford's barouche in Mansfield Park because it gets a decent amount of page time and logistical discussion.
Mm-hmm.
First, we should note that this is the same barouche that brings Mary Crawford her harp when no one else can bring it during the harvest. So, barouche-harp combo is really iconic for these assemblies.
I mean, that is quite the image, the mental image of this barouche hauling a harp. Yeah. So when they are planning the visit to Sotherton, Edmund rides on horseback. So this leaves Crawford and Julia in the driving seat, which Maria is very jealous about. And then we have Mary, Maria, Aunt Norris, and Fanny in the seats. And Maria is in the front-facing seat, so she gets a direct view of Julia and Crawford flirting on that driver's seat. So, it's quite a memorable travel for her.
Fun for her. The barouche is designed for good weather and sightseeing. Kristen Olson in All Things Austen, an encyclopedia of Austen's world, points out that Crawford's ownership of a barouche is appropriate since, quote, it is a fair-weather conveyance, and he turns out to be a fair-weather gentleman, unable to bear real hardship or frustration to win Fanny's love. He is inconstant. Like the carriage, like the man,
Yes, indeed. So another notable barouche scene comes to us from Persuasion, when Anne, her sister, and Mrs. Clay are caught in the rain while shopping on Milsom Street. So after spotting Lady Dalrymple's barouche, there's all this maneuvering and whatnot to see who will ride in that carriage and who will walk home with Mr. Elliot. But what's particularly delightful about all of this debate over who gets to ride with the Dalrymples is that, let's not forget, this is a barouche.
As Jennifer Ewing points out in her article, As the Wheel Turns, Horse-Drawn Vehicles in Jane Austen's novels. The people who are writing these articles about carriages during this time are just nailing it with the titles.
They're nailing the puns. We're just loving it. Yes. No notes. Delightful.
Quote, while being called for in Lady Dalrymple's barouche is a social coup, Miss Elliot and Mrs. Clay do not escape getting wet because the barouche's single hood only covers the forward-facing seat. So they're getting wet regardless. I mean, really, the barouche, like, that hood, it's really more of a sunshade, right? Than any kind of, like, inclement weather protection.
Yeah. And so it's delightful that they're like, oh, because it's all about prestige, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you should be understanding, is that, like, in no way are they getting any protection from the rain by going in this carriage.
Ewing also observes that, quote, when Anne marries Captain Wentworth, she becomes the mistress of a very pretty landaulette, which causes her sister Mary to suffer. A little bit of jealousy there. And a landaulette, like a baby landau, is just, it's just a mini version.
Yeah. But the fact that we're getting those kind of two different landau or barouche, these open carriage references in Persuasion, it is delightful. And of course, Mary is like...
Well, it's really like a signifier, right? That Anne, she didn't just marry, but she married money,
well.
Right? Like, they can afford for her to just have this, like, little casual vehicle to tool around in.
Yes. Yeah. Causes Mary to suffer. I do appreciate that. All right. And last but not least is the mention of the Barouche-landau in Emma. As Hazel Jones points out in her book, Jane Austen's Journeys, the Barouche-landau is mentioned 4 times in succession, just in case Emma has missed the point. And so the Barouche-landau, this is a relatively new innovation, and yet it's worth noting that in the context of the novel, it never actually arrives in Highbury. Remember, its absence is what actually causes the improvised strawberry picking day at Donwell and the trip to Box Hill.
How we suffer without the Barouche-landau. What will we do to entertain ourselves?
It's hard going.
Jones continues, quote, the Morning Post of January 5th, 1804, reported, Mr. Buxton, he of the Four Horse Club, the celebrated whip, has just launched a newfangled machine, a kind of nondescript. It is described by the inventor to be the due medium between a landau and a barouche, but all who have seen it say it more resembles a fish cart or a music caravan.
So perhaps some of the derision for this new vehicle was that it's a combination of 2 slightly impractical vehicles squashed together. It might also have a little bit to do with the fact that this was a vehicle favored by the Prince Regent. Again, someone totally known for his practicality.
Sandy Lerner, in her article, Pen and Parsimony, Carriages in the Novels of Jane Austen, another good title, writes, use of the barouche-landau is a pointed social statement. Barouche-landau conveys the fact that Mr. Suckling is trying to emulate the Prince Regent, an absurd extravagance that impresses Mrs. Elton greatly, but is certainly used by Austen in a deprecating way. Also the fact that she's associating the barouche-landau with characters we are clearly not supposed to like, with a vehicle that's favored by the Prince Regent in a novel that is dedicated to said Prince Regent. Jane Austen, we bow down. We bow down.
She is gutsy, and I love it. It is so good. So all of this kind of is to say, and this is to quote Hazel Jones, barouches are bad news in Jane Austen's novels. Lady Catherine de Bourgh and the Viscountess Dalrymple both have one. Henry Crawford's barouche adds spice to his flirtation with Julia and Maria Bertram. Silly Charlotte Palmer drives about London in one. Fanny Dashwood's ambitions for her brother Edward extend to barouche ownership. And Mrs. Elton's panegyrics on the Sucklings are larded with references to their spanking new mode of transport, the barouche-landau, not seen in England until after 1800.
Using Sucklings with larded in the same sentence is also
so good.
Good word choice there.
Good word. All of that. It's just, it's succinct. I love it. Barouches are bad news in Austen. That is the thesis.
And it's not to say, right, that Austen is necessarily being like, oh, just because you own this type of carriage, you are automatically a bad person.
Right.
Like, we do have Anne Elliot, who, of course, we adore, who becomes mistress of a pretty little landaulet. And you can imagine, I mean, a Mr. Darcy, I'm sure he has a barouche. Like, come on.
Sure.
But it's really more about how the fact that for Elizabeth, you know, it's so important to be seen riding in Lady Dalrymple's barouche. Like, it's just, it's sort of the way that both the people who own them and the people who aspire to own them kind of interact with these vehicles that is really telling us a lot about these characters.
Yeah.
Because although Austen, clearly from her works, was using this as sort of a pointed reference for certain characters, we do have to share this final quote from Jones, which includes a bit of one of Austen's letters. Jane Austen did not class herself with the Lady Catherines, Selina Sucklings, and Mrs. Lee Perrots of this world, who believed that driving around in a barouche was their automatic privilege. Nevertheless, she found the novelty of taking an airing in one entertaining. And this is from Austen's letter. The driving about, the carriage being open, was very pleasant. I liked my solitary elegance very much, and was ready to laugh all the time at my being where I was. I could not but feel that I had naturally small right to be parading about London in a barouche. She has a sense of humor about it, you know?
I love that.
She's like, this is a little ridiculous, but also, it's kind of nice up here.
Right? She's like, and I will now start like waving at the peasantry because I'm just enjoying this ride.
It's less about owning a barouche. It's like how you own a barouche. You know what I mean? Like, you just don't brag about it. Well, if any of you have any thoughts on barouche-landaus, if any of you, for whatever reason, have managed to ride in one of these, we definitely send us photos. Like, we want to hear about that. You can find us on Instagram at The Thing About Austen and on our website, thethingaboutaustin.com. You can also email us at thethingaboutaustin@gmail.com. And thank you again to our sponsor, Sony Pictures Home Entertainment, presenting Jane Austen Wrecked My Life.
Stay tuned for next episode when we'll be talking about the Assizes.
Thanks for listening.
Bye! Agathe is a hopelessly clumsy yet charming young woman working at the legendary Shakespeare & Co. bookshop in Paris. She dreams of becoming a successful writer and finding love like in a Jane Austen novel. But she's desperately single and battling writer's block. When her best friend lands her a spot at the Jane Austen Writers' Residency in England, everything changes. Critics call Jane Austen Wrecked My Life a delectable modern rom-com and brimming with charm. Watch at home on digital today. Rated R.